All right. So we are starting to rough cut and piece together the most important part of your creature, which is the focal point of the head. And I put the 3 layers that are making up my head, I put them all into a group, a layer folder, and labeled that head. And that allows me to move them together and even to transform them together while still being able to individually edit them and blend them and color correct them. Now I want to think about the other part of the factory floor, the body. So I'm going to collapse the head folder for the moment, and I'm going to bring on new reference, and mainly the porcupine. So though I don't always use all my reference, there is certain reference that's really important. I can open it with preview and kind of see what I've got. Seems like that one would be pretty helpful as a base. And then for the individual quills, this is pretty helpful. Now notice with your photo reference, a lot of animal photography uses a really tight depth of field, which means it's really focused and sharp in one part, and then very quickly it gets very blurry. So it can look good from a distance, but when you really examine it up close, only little parts of this might be useful. And in fact, I'm going to use this not for the body, but for the head. And so sometimes when you examine your reference, you'll see it in different ways. So how do I mean? Well, I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to flip it horizontally. And then I'm going to take that part that's in focus and grab it, which is the little eye and the bill and the forehead, and then these spikes that come from it. I'm going to rough cut that, duplicate it, Command J. And then I'm going to bring that into my head folder. Oops. And then individually move that layer up. And usually I find a really cool eye. Like I really like iguana and chameleon eyes. They're incredibly textured and interesting, because eyes are the focal point of the head. But you can also make more interesting decisions. So maybe I put my eye in a different kind of place. And maybe the eye is clear. You don't want to hide the eye unless you're doing like a mole kind of concept. So this eye is going to be a little bit darker. But you can see how I'm covering up that big kind of nostril. And maybe I can use some of that texture to blend it, right? And I haven't color corrected any of this yet. So I like that eye and that placement. And I might even decide, this is how compositing works, right? That I like that eye placement, but I like the red and the highlights around this eye. So I'm going to internally composite, grab this, move it above, and then put that eye onto here. Does that make sense? So it's really more fine-tuned than your landscape. When you're building an engine, Ferrari's famous for always hand building its engines. You know, not machine building them, not mass producing its engines. Because you're going to pick all the parts of the head and you're going to clean them and color correct them and adjust them, and then you're going to really carefully weld and blend them. And sometimes you'll just take components from one part and use them in another part, right? And you can see it doesn't take a lot of blending as long as the structure is there, like everything's in its right place, for this to start to really make sense. At least in my head it starts to. All right. Even though none of the colors match yet. And usually I would always do direct adjustments before I started blending. But it's just showing you. I already have, just in the head, 5 layers, which is the requirement. So the head is where most of your focus should go. And really, as long as that's unique, I could really just take a good reference of a porcupine like this and then flip it. So I'm going to flip it horizontally. I'm going to tilt it. I'm going to grow it a little bit. This is just for the back and the spine ridge. And now I'm going to cut it out with lots of overlap. All that green is going to go away eventually, but I'm just going to grab all of it. I don't really need the head, but delete the smart object, move it behind the head folder, and I can start to get a sense of how to blend this together. So Command T, and I can use warp to line up that spinal movement, right? Now what I was hoping is that that porcupine would also have feet, and then maybe I'd just be done. That would be nice. But I have ideas for like the chicken feet and for the poofy tail. So I'm going to have a little bit more than 5 layers here. And then I can trim out what I know I don't need for the body, which would be the head of this porcupine and the tail of this porcupine. But again, get as much overlap as is feasible. You can trim the rest. And I'm going to turn off the head now. Well, actually, no, I'll leave it on. But I'm building the body separate from the head, right? It's going to be important. And now, what else do I have for the body? Well, I have things for the wings. I get to interrogate that reference. And I like this little example of a dodo piece of taxidermy. And the wing seems in focus. It's not the most in focus picture. That's actually from Harvard's Peabody Natural History Museum. And I've been there, and it's hard to take good photos because it's really dark. So I understand why it's not the best focus, even though it was on Pixabay. But it's large enough that if I just grab that wing with a lot of overlap, going into the leg, in fact, maybe even more overlap than I'm using, because maybe I want the belly as well. Oops. Got to add to it with Shift. So I'll grab all of that, maybe even grab some of this. Remember, you can always delete it later. So don't be stingy about what you use, okay? And then delete that smart object. And then transform it, Command T, right click, flip it horizontally. Your sketch keeps you in proportion. Use warp. Kind of stretch it out. I need to get that wing in the right place for this dodo bird. And the wing is a little bit further back than you would expect, which makes it a bipedal animal. Okay. And now the legs. And I think these look very promising. But feet, I said, remember, are going to be the hardest things. So those are almost in focus, but not quite. which is a pity because they're super strong in terms of their angle. But these ones are a lot clearer. Feet are also hard to find good reference for because they're almost always moving. Yeah, so I think it's going to be these feet that I use. And I could always use one from one and another from another, but nice to be able to take the whole connection of them when possible. So first, you kind of grow it as a smart object, and then you cut away from it. And by the way, serious paleontologists and people that try to theorize about dinosaurs, they take most of their composites from poultry, from chickens, like all these kind of domestic varieties. I think just because they're easy to get photos of. But they're also very colorful, very dramatic. So you'll see a lot of chicken-looking T-Rexes online. And those legs look pretty dorky just because they look so stiff. I don't love that, but I can fix it. So sometimes you have to fix it within your reference. So watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this joint, which I know is there, but is just locked in this photo. And I'm going to grab that foot, and I'm going to duplicate it, Command J. This is internal compositing. Then Command T, and I'm going to tilt it so that I can bend that joint just a little bit. Let's see, how do I want to make it work? And so with warping and distorting, you can change the position of things in ways that can work better for your pose. So there we go. So I'm tilting it back and strengthening it a little bit. And then I'm going to take this connection, the upper part of that leg, duplicate it, run it behind, Command T, rotate it, and make it bigger because it's closer to us. So it connects. And I need to do all the color correction and stuff. And then I'm going to blend it just immediately because I want to kind of bring these layers together so they're not three different assets I have to worry about. Now, how can I make that look better? Like this, I can use dodge, use all the adjustment tools that we were learning about last class to finish off our landscape. And I can brighten up this leg. And I'm going to teach you a new adjustment tool, which is called sharpen, precisely for this reason. Just that part of the leg, which I copied over and made bigger, it's softened because of focus and because of growing, but I want it to be as sharp as this. So what I do is above the dodge, burn, sponge tools, these are all the direct adjustment tools, I see the blur, sharpen, and smudge tool. I'm going to use sharpen. I'm going to use it large, 0% hardness, strength of, let's say, 30. You generally don't want to do strengths higher than 30 on any of these tools because they're so powerful. And then I just go over it, and you'll see it's going to increase the contrast at the edges between pixels. And we'll make it sharper and sharper. Now, if I do it too much, it will start giving me a lot of digital noise. I want to do it just enough so it looks like it could be blended. And sure enough, that works. And now, I can erase away, blend a little bit more of it, and even cut out the edge. and then blend